I left my injured mother alone because she cut me out of her will. Ignoring her scolding messages, I chose my life. I never imagined my life would revolve around managing crises. Growing up, my family seemed ordinary enough. My mother was a vibrant woman, always bustling about with endless energy, and my younger brother and I were close, typical siblings with our fair share of rivalry and camaraderie. My father, a steady presence, worked hard to provide for us until his untimely passing when I was in my early 20s. His death left a void, but we managed to hold things together. It wasn't until my mother retired that everything started to unravel. Retirement was supposed to be a golden period for my mother, a time to relax and enjoy the fruits of her lifelong labor. Instead, it marked the beginning of a series of unfortunate events that would drastically alter our family dynamics. My mother, once the pillar of strength, became the most accident and illness-prone person I had ever known. It's almost as if a dark cloud settled over her life the moment she stepped away from her job. Throughout these years, my younger brother was largely absent. He's single, with no kids and few responsibilities, yet he rarely stepped up. He would visit during his summer vacations, help with superficial tasks like moving furniture or taking her car in for service, and then disappear until it suited him to visit again. In contrast, I'm married with kids in school, a demanding career, and a side gig to keep us financially stable. Despite my full plate, I was the one who had to respond to every emergency. It became an unspoken rule. If something happened to Mom, I was the one who dropped everything to be there. The dynamic between my mother and brother has always been different. She dotes on him, often praising his minimal efforts as if they were grand gestures. When he does something as simple as hanging a picture or fixing a leaky faucet, she showers him with compliments. It's infuriating because, in her eyes, he can do no wrong, while my sacrifices go unnoticed or are taken for granted. It's as if I'm invisible, only summoned when there's a crisis. Her dependency on me has only grown over the years. Each time she's been hospitalized or needed extensive care, it's fallen on me to arrange everything. I've had to burn through my paid time off, cash in savings, and leave my own family to fend for themselves. My kids have had to celebrate milestones without me, and my spouse has had to pick up the slack at home. It's been a relentless cycle of sacrifice and neglect, all while my brother continues his carefree existence. Balancing my family responsibilities with my work and personal life has been a Herculean task. Each day feels like I'm walking a tightrope, trying to keep everything from crashing down. My career, once a source of pride and fulfillment, now feels like a juggling act where one misstep can send everything tumbling. My job requires long hours and a high level of commitment, and while I enjoy the challenges, it leaves little room for anything else. Add to that my side gig, which was initially a passion project but has since become a financial necessity, and you have a recipe for constant stress. At home, my children demand and deserve my attention. They're growing up fast, and every missed milestone feels like a dagger to the heart. I've missed school plays, sports events, and countless family dinners because I had to rush to my mother's side. My spouse has been incredibly supportive, picking up the slack and managing the household in my absence, but it's taken a toll on our relationship. We rarely have time for each other, and when we do, I'm often too exhausted to engage meaningfully. The weight of my mother's needs presses down on me constantly, turning even moments of respite into periods of guilt and worry. My younger brother, on the other hand, seems to live in a different world entirely. He's single, with no kids or significant responsibilities. He works low-wage jobs, hopping from one to another without much thought about the future. His carefree lifestyle stands in stark contrast to my own, and it's a constant source of frustration. He only helps when it's convenient for him, like during his summer vacations. He'll visit my mother, do some superficial tasks like moving furniture or taking her car for service, and then vanish again until his next convenient window. I remember one particularly frustrating incident. It was the middle of winter, and my mother had slipped on ice, breaking her hip. The hospital called me, as usual, and I had to drop everything to be there. My brother, who was between jobs at the time, didn't offer to help. He was planning a ski trip with friends and didn't want to cancel. I ended up spending 2 weeks with my mother, arranging for her surgery, managing her post-operative care, and ensuring she had everything she needed for her recovery. My job was understanding, but I had to take unpaid leave, and the financial strain was palpable. Another time, my mother was diagnosed with pneumonia. It was a severe case, and she was hospitalized for several weeks. My brother was working a temporary job at a resort, and when I called to ask if he could come down, he flat out refused, saying he couldn't afford to lose the job. Once again, I was the one who had to step in, coordinate her care, and spend sleepless nights at her bedside. My children had to fend for themselves, and my spouse had to manage the household alone, all while I was hundreds of miles away. There was also the time my mother had a head-on car collision. It was a rainy afternoon, and I was in the middle of an important meeting when the hospital called. My heart sank as I listened to the nurse explain the severity of the accident. I immediately left work, catching the next flight to be with her. My brother, who was living rent-free with a wealthy relative, didn't even bother to visit. He said he had commitments that he couldn't break, but I knew better. He simply didn't want to deal with the inconvenience. Not long after she recovered from the accident, she was diagnosed with cancer. Twice. The first time was breast cancer. The doctors caught it early, and she underwent surgery and chemotherapy. The treatments took a toll on her, both physically and emotionally. I was there for every appointment, every tear-filled night. Just as we thought we were in the clear, she was diagnosed with a different type of cancer a year later. More surgeries, more treatments, and more sleepless nights for both of us. As if the universe wasn't done testing us, she was involved in another car accident, this time getting T-boned at an intersection. The injuries weren't life-threatening, but they compounded her existing health issues, making her even more dependent on me. Each of these emergencies has left scars, not just on my mother, but on me and my family. I've burned through my paid time off, cashed in savings, and missed countless moments with my own children. My spouse has been my rock, but the strain is evident. We rarely have time to connect, and when we do, the looming shadow of my mother's next crisis hangs over us. It's a relentless cycle of sacrifice and neglect, and it's wearing me down. My brother's behavior adds salt to the wound. He'll visit during his summer vacations, taking my mother out for lunch or doing minor repairs around her house, and she showers him with praise. "Look at how handy he is," she'll say, showing me a picture he hung or a shelf he fixed. It's infuriating. Here I am, sacrificing my time, money, and emotional well-being, and he gets lauded for the bare minimum. My mother's blind spot for his indifference and my resentment grows with each passing day. The passive-aggressive texts from my mother are a constant reminder of the imbalance. "Your brother hung this lovely picture when he was here last summer," she'll text, followed by a photo of a mediocre piece of art. Or, "He took my car in for service, such a help." It's as if she's trying to rub salt in the wound, reminding me of his occasional convenient contributions while ignoring my constant grueling efforts. When I ask if anyone else could step in, the answer is always the same. "But you're the one she wants." It's an infuriating mantra that makes me feel both indispensable and undervalued. My brother's ability to shirk responsibility without consequence only amplifies my frustration. I've had to develop a thick skin, learning to navigate the emotional landmines of our family dynamics while trying to maintain my own sanity. The emotional toll is immense. I love my mother dearly, and I want to be there for her, but the constant pressure and lack of appreciation have worn me down. It's not just the physical care, it's the emotional labor of constantly being the one to hold everything together. A few months ago, I stumbled upon a document that would shake me to my core. While cleaning up my mother's office, I accidentally discovered her will. I wasn't snooping. I was trying to organize her cluttered paperwork. My heart stopped when I saw my mother's signature on the document, and I couldn't help but read it. The contents of the will were a gut punch. Except for some small amounts left to my children, she was leaving everything to my brother. The total estate was valued at over $250,000. I was stunned, hurt, perplexed. It felt like a betrayal. After everything I'd done for her, all the sacrifices I made, this was her decision? The next day, I called her, my hands trembling as I dialed her number. The conversation started off casual, but my heart pounded as I broached the topic. "Mom, I found your will while organizing your papers," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "I noticed that you've left almost everything to my brother. I don't understand. Can we talk about this?" There was a long pause on the other end. Then, she sighed deeply. "I don't want to discuss it," she said, her tone icy. "It's my decision, and that's final." "But Mom," I pleaded, my voice breaking. "I've done so much for you. I've been there through every crisis, every emergency. Why would you leave everything to him?" Her response was curt and dismissive. "He needs it more. End of discussion." With that, she hung up. I stared at the phone in disbelief, tears streaming down my face. The woman I had dedicated so much of my life to, the woman I had sacrificed countless hours and emotional energy for, had dismissed my concerns in a matter of seconds. I tried reaching out to her again, sending texts, leaving voicemails, but she ignored every attempt. It felt like she had built a wall, shutting me out completely. I was left to grapple with my emotions alone, the hurt and confusion gnawing at me. Desperate for answers, I turned to her siblings, hoping they could shed some light on her decision. It was my aunt, her older sister, who finally broke the silence. We met at a local coffee shop, a neutral ground where we could talk without interruption. "She's doing it to ensure your brother can retire comfortably," my aunt explained, her expression a mix of sympathy and resignation. He's always worked low-wage jobs, and she wants to make sure he'll be okay. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. But he lives rent-free with a wealthy relative, I argued. He has no expenses. Meanwhile, I've been struggling to balance everything, sacrificing so much. How is this fair? My aunt sighed. I know it doesn't seem fair. But in your mother's mind, she's doing what she thinks is best for him. She's always worried about him, and she believes this is the way to secure his future. Her words did little to comfort me. Instead, they fueled my sense of injustice. My brother, who had lived a carefree life, was being rewarded while my efforts and sacrifices went unrecognized. The emotional impact was devastating. I felt undervalued, unappreciated, and deeply hurt. The turmoil inside me was relentless. I replayed the conversation with my mother over and over in my mind, each time feeling the sting of her indifference. My nights were sleepless, filled with anxious thoughts and a deep sense of betrayal. I couldn't understand how she could so easily dismiss everything I had done for her. At home the strain was evident. My spouse tried to comfort me, but I was inconsolable. The children sensed my distress, asking why I was so sad. It broke my heart to see their worried faces, knowing that my own family was suffering because of the emotional weight I was carrying. My brother, oblivious to the chaos his preferential treatment had caused, continued with his life. He would call occasionally, boasting about his latest adventures or plans, completely unaware of the storm brewing within me. Each conversation felt like a reminder of my mother's betrayal, deepening my resentment. One night, as I lay in bed, unable to sleep, my spouse turned to me and said, "You need to let it go, for your own sake and for ours. You can't keep carrying this burden." Their words struck a chord. I realized that I was allowing my mother's decision to consume me, to dictate my happiness. But letting go was easier said than done. The sense of being undervalued and unappreciated had burrowed deep into my psyche, affecting every aspect of my life. I began to pull back from my mother, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. The constant pressure and emotional labor were too much to bear. I stopped responding to her passive-aggressive texts, choosing instead to focus on my own family and their needs. Despite my best efforts, the fallout was inevitable. My mother continued to send guilt-laden messages, painting herself as the victim. "I understand you're too busy," she would write, "but it's so hard to manage without you." Each message felt like a dagger, reopening wounds that had barely begun to heal. Relatives started to call, questioning why I wasn't helping as much as before. They couldn't understand the emotional toll it had taken on me, the sense of betrayal that had driven me to this point. I felt isolated, caught between my duty to my mother and my need for self-care. In the end, I had to accept that I couldn't change my mother's mind or her will. I had to find peace in knowing that I had done my best, even if it went unrecognized. It was a painful lesson in setting boundaries and prioritizing my own well-being. As the months passed, I slowly began to reclaim my sense of self. I focused on my career, my spouse, and my children, finding joy in the moments I had previously missed. The wounds from my mother's betrayal still ached, but they no longer defined me. I was learning to let go, one step at a time. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when the phone rang, breaking the fragile tranquility that had settled over our home. I glanced at the caller ID and saw it was the hospital. My heart sank, a familiar dread washing over me. Bracing myself, I answered, only to hear the now routine script of disaster. My mother had been in another accident. This time, she had fallen down a flight of stairs in her home. The fall had resulted in a fractured hip and several bruises. The nurse on the other end of the line explained the severity of her injuries and the immediate surgery she required. As I listened, a sense of déjà vu enveloped me. Another emergency, another crisis, another expectation for me to drop everything and rush to her side. After hanging up, I sat down, my mind racing. My mother had always expected me to be there, no matter the cost. And each time, I had complied, setting aside my own life, my own needs, to take care of hers. But this time was different. The wounds from discovering her will were still fresh, and the emotional strain was more than I could bear. The sense of betrayal and hurt resurfaced with a vengeance. I called my mother to inform her I had received the hospital's message. Her voice, weak and laced with pain, still carried an underlying expectation. "I'm at the hospital, dear. They say I need surgery. Can you come down?" she asked, almost as if it were a given. I hesitated, my heart pounding. "Mom? I don't think I can come this time," I stammered. There was a stunned silence on the other end. "What do you mean you can't come? I need you. I can't manage on my own." The internal conflict was excruciating. Every fiber of my being screamed to be there for her, to support her as I always had. But the bitter memories of her will and her disregard for my sacrifices surfaced, fueling a sense of spite and frustration. I took a deep breath, my voice trembling. Ask my brother to help. He should be the one there for you this time. Her reaction was immediate and defensive. He can't help with everything, especially not with this. He's a man, there are things he just can't do. I need you. Hearing her defend my brother yet again, excusing his absence, was the last straw. The pent-up resentment and exhaustion boiled over. Mom, I've been there every time, for every emergency. But I can't keep doing this. I need to think about my own family and my own sanity. Her voice hardened, turning icy. So you're abandoning me in my time of need? After everything I've done for you? I felt a surge of anger and hurt. After everything you've done for me? What about everything I've done for you, Mom? It's always been me, never him. And yet, you're leaving everything to him in your will. You're ensuring his future while taking mine for granted. The line went silent. Then she spoke, her voice cold and distant. If that's how you feel, then maybe you should stay where you are. I hung up, my hands shaking. The guilt and pain were almost unbearable, but there was also a strange sense of relief. For the first time, I had put my foot down, refusing to let her needs overshadow my own. It was a decision born of frustration and spite, but also of necessity. As the hours passed, I wrestled with my emotions. The guilt was overwhelming, gnawing at my conscience. I knew my mother was in pain, struggling without my help. The thought of her suffering alone was almost too much to bear. But I also knew that if I continued to sacrifice myself for her, I would lose what little was left of my own life and sanity. My spouse stood by me, offering unwavering support. You've done more than enough, they said, holding my hand. It's time for others to step up. You need to take care of yourself and our family. I tried to focus on my family, finding solace in the small moments of joy and connection with my children. But my mother's passive-aggressive texts continued, each one a fresh wound. I understand you're too busy, she wrote. I'll call my sister if I have to. I just didn't think it would come to this. The guilt and disappointment were relentless, but I clung to the support of my spouse and the conviction that I had made the right choice. I had to believe that it was possible to care for my mother without sacrificing my own well-being. In the end, I knew that my decision was a turning point. It was a painful but necessary step in reclaiming my life and setting boundaries. My mother would have to learn to rely on others, and my brother would need to step up. It was time for me to prioritize my own needs and those of my immediate family, even if it meant facing the fallout and enduring the guilt. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you. Am I the A for refusing my friend's request to ask my partner to drive her to work when I take time off work to give birth? At 7 months pregnant, my daily routine has become a carefully managed balance of preparation and endurance. Each morning begins at 5:30 a.m., with the alarm dragging me from sleep. Rising now takes more effort, with my growing belly making simple movements cumbersome. By 5:30 a.m., I'm dressed and in the kitchen, preparing breakfast for myself and my partner, who has been my rock throughout this pregnancy. We recently moved into a new apartment, a decision made with our expanding family in mind. The apartment is cozy and well lit, offering just enough space for the nursery we're eagerly setting up. Living here has brought us a sense of peace and anticipation for the future. Around 5:45 a.m., I head out to pick up my friend. She lives only a few minutes away, a convenience that has made our carpool arrangement possible over the past year. Initially, it was an easy favor, as we lived in the same apartment complex. Even after moving in with my partner, I've continued this routine out of a sense of loyalty and friendship. My friend, unable to drive and without nearby family to assist her, relies on me for her daily commute. By 6 a.m. I'm at her place, and we head to work together, arriving by 6:30 a.m. This part of my routine has become ingrained, despite the increasing physical demands of pregnancy. My partner's schedule is slightly more forgiving. He doesn't need to leave for work until 7:30 a.m., allowing him a bit more time in the morning. His job is stable and he's been incredibly supportive, especially as the pregnancy progresses. Living in our new apartment has been a welcome change. We've started setting up the nursery, buying furniture, and decorating the space. It's a small but meaningful way to prepare for the baby, providing a focus for our excitement and hopes for the future. Despite the early mornings and the physical toll, I've tried to keep things as normal as possible. Giving my friend a ride to work has become a part of that normalcy. However, with my maternity leave approaching, I'm beginning to realize that this routine will soon need to change. The thought of driving with a newborn at 6 a.m. is daunting, and I know it's not a practical solution. This realization has brought about a mix of emotions. On one hand, I feel a strong sense of responsibility towards my friend, who depends on me for her commute. On the other hand, I need to prioritize my own health and the well-being of my baby. It's a difficult balance, and as my leave date draws nearer, I'm becoming more aware of the impending changes and the challenges they will bring. My friendship with the woman who now relies on me for rides to work began several years ago. We met at a previous job, where we quickly bonded over shared interests and experiences. Over time our friendship deepened, and we became close confidants. When she got her current job, I was thrilled for her and happy to help her secure the position. This made it easy and natural for me to offer her a ride to work when she needed one. Initially the arrangement was straightforward and convenient. We both lived in the same apartment complex just a few minutes apart. It made sense for me to swing by her place on my way to work. At that time, it felt like a small favor for a good friend, one that I was more than happy to provide. The routine became part of our daily lives, and it allowed us to catch up and share conversations during the drive, further strengthening our bond. As my pregnancy progressed, the simplicity of our arrangement began to shift. The demands of my condition made the early morning routine more challenging. What once felt like an effortless favor now required careful planning and considerable energy. I started to feel the strain, but my sense of loyalty and commitment to our friendship kept me going. I didn't want to let her down, especially knowing she had no other viable transportation options. With maternity leave on the horizon, I began to grapple with the reality that I wouldn't be able to continue our carpool arrangement. The thought of navigating early morning drives with a newborn was overwhelming. I knew that I needed to focus on my health and prepare for the baby's arrival. This impending change was a source of stress, as I was aware of how much my friend depended on me. My pregnancy itself had been relatively smooth, but as the months went by, the physical and emotional demands increased. Preparing for maternity leave added another layer of complexity. I had to ensure that everything at work was in order before I stepped away, and I needed to prepare our home for the baby. The closer I got to my due date, the more I realized how crucial it was to shift my priorities. Despite the challenges, I tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. Continuing to give my friend rides was part of that effort. However, I was becoming increasingly aware that I needed to set boundaries for my own well-being and the well-being of my growing family. The impending maternity leave was a turning point, marking a time when I would need to focus entirely on my new role as a mother and the adjustments that came with it. As my baby's due date got closer, I started to worry about how I could keep giving my friend rides once I was on maternity leave. I knew that having a baby would change everything, and the idea of early morning drives with a newborn seemed too hard. I was concerned about the toll on my body, my baby's safety, and how it would affect our new family routine. My friend's lack of driving skills was a big problem. Even though we live in a place where you really need a car, she never learned to drive. She always used public transport or relied on friends like me. I understood her situation. The closest driving school was 2 hours away, so it was really hard for her to take lessons. She also didn't have family nearby to help. Over time my friend got more and more worried about how she would get around. She tried everything she could think of. She asked coworkers, but none of them lived nearby or had the same work hours. Public transport here isn't reliable and wouldn't get her to work on time. Ride-sharing services were too expensive for her to use every day. Every time something didn't work out, it added to her stress and mine. Our car rides together started to be filled with her worries. She kept bringing up her transport problems, and it was clear how stressed she was. I felt bad for her, but I also had my own worries. I was torn between wanting to help and needing to get ready for my baby. One day she told me how scared she was about losing her job once I was on maternity leave. I felt for her, but I knew I couldn't keep giving her rides. I told her that once the baby came, I wouldn't be able to help as much. I needed to focus on my health and my baby. Even though I tried to be understanding, she got more anxious. She kept coming up with ideas that would mean big sacrifices for me or my partner. It made me realize how much she was relying on me and how hard it would be for her to find another way. She even half-jokingly suggested that my partner could drive her. But that wouldn't work. He already works a lot, and it wouldn't be fair to add more to his plate. Plus, we were both getting ready for our baby. No matter what I said, she kept pushing for a solution. It felt like she was pressuring me, and it added to my stress. I could see how scared she was, but I couldn't put her needs before mine and my baby's. This whole thing started to hurt our friendship. Our nice chats during drives turned into her worrying and me feeling guilty. I was stuck between being a good friend and a good mom-to-be. As my maternity leave got closer, the pressure got worse. I knew we needed a solution, but it seemed less and less likely that we'd find one that worked for both of us. I was struggling with how to handle this tough situation without hurting myself or my family. One morning, as we were driving to work, my friend turned to me with a mix of determination and desperation. "Have you considered asking your partner to drive me to work once you're on maternity leave?" she asked, her tone hopeful, as if she had found the perfect solution. I took a deep breath, feeling the tension rise. I can't ask him to do that, I replied gently but firmly. He has his own schedule and needs to be at work by 7:30. Asking him to drive you would mean he'd have to wake up even earlier and adjust his entire morning routine. Her face fell, frustration evident in her eyes. But it's only for a little while, right? Just until I can figure something out. I really don't have any other options. I shook my head, feeling a pang of guilt but resolute in my decision. I understand your situation, and I wish I could do more to help. But it's not fair to ask him to change his routine. We're both going to have a lot on our plates with the baby coming. She sighed deeply, her frustration turning into something more pointed. It's his fault you're pregnant after all. The least he could do is help me out. As your friend, I'd really appreciate it. Her comment stung. I knew she didn't mean it maliciously, but it felt like a low blow. I tried to keep my composure. I know you're stressed, and I'm sorry you're in this situation. But I'm not asking him. It's not just about him waking up earlier. It's about the added stress and responsibility. We need to focus on preparing for the baby. Her reaction was immediate and intense. I wouldn't have taken this job if I knew I couldn't rely on you for rides. You helped me get this job and now you're just going to leave me stranded? I felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Anger, guilt, frustration. I didn't anticipate getting pregnant when I helped you get the job, I said, trying to stay calm. Things have changed, and I have to prioritize my family's needs. The car ride became uncomfortably silent, the air thick with tension. I could see her out of the corner of my eye, her body language rigid and her expression a mix of hurt and anger. She felt abandoned, and I felt terrible for it. But I also knew I couldn't compromise my well-being and that of my unborn child. Over the next few days, the tension between us only grew. My friend began to insist more frequently, bringing up the topic at every opportunity. Have you asked him yet? She would ask, her voice tinged with impatience. I'm not going to ask him, I repeated each time, feeling the strain of the repeated argument. It's not fair to put that on him, especially with everything we have going on. One evening my partner noticed my distress and asked what was wrong. I explained the situation to him, including my friend's suggestion. As I expected, he immediately offered to help, his people-pleasing nature shining through. But I quickly shut it down. No, you don't need to do that, I said firmly. We have enough to deal with. She needs to find another solution. He looked relieved but also concerned. Are you sure? I don't mind helping if it's that important to her. I appreciate it, but it's not just about driving her. It's about setting boundaries and making sure we're taking care of ourselves first. We're going to have a newborn soon, and we need to be ready for that. The next morning as I picked up my friend, she immediately asked if I had spoken to my partner. I braced myself for the familiar conversation. He offered to help, but I told him no. We need to focus on our family right now. Her reaction was more intense this time. You're being selfish, she said, her voice shaking with emotion. I've been relying on you, and now you're just cutting me off. I'm not trying to be selfish, I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. I'm trying to be realistic. We need to set boundaries for our own sanity and well-being. The rest of the drive was filled with an awkward silence. I could feel her resentment and my own guilt weighing heavily in the air. As we arrived at work, I tried one last time to reach out. I hope you can understand my position. I wish things were different, but this is how it has to be. She didn't respond, just got out of the car and walked away, leaving me with a sinking feeling in my stomach. The conflict had reached a boiling point, and I was left wondering if our friendship could survive this strain. The tension between my friend and me reached its peak one morning, just a few days before my maternity leave was set to begin. As soon as she got into the car, I could sense the anxiety radiating from her. We hadn't spoken much over the past few rides, the silence heavy with unresolved conflict. Today, however, she seemed determined to break that silence. I really don't know what I'm going to do, she began, her voice trembling slightly. You're leaving me in such a difficult position. I just can't believe you won't even ask your partner to help. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. I've explained this to you so many times, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. It's not fair to him, and it's not just about asking. It's about the stress and responsibility we're both going to be under with a newborn. But you're the one who helped me get this job, she argued, her tone edging towards desperation. You knew I didn't have a car or a license. I feel like you're abandoning me when I need you the most. Her words cut deep, and I felt a familiar pang of guilt. I had always prided myself on being a dependable friend, someone others could count on. But this time, I had to draw the line, and it was tearing me apart inside. I'm not abandoning you, I said, my voice softer now, filled with regret. I'm just trying to balance everything. I have to think about my baby and my own health too. She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. It just feels like you're choosing your own convenience over helping a friend in need. If the roles were reversed, I would do anything to help you. Her words were like a knife twisting in my heart. The truth was, I did feel guilty. I felt like I was letting her down at a crucial time, and it pained me to see her so distressed. But I also knew that I couldn't compromise my family's well-being. The internal struggle was overwhelming, a constant battle between my desire to help and my need to protect my own. I wish things were different, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I wish I could keep helping you without it affecting everything else. But I can't do that right now. Please try to understand. She looked away, her face a mask of hurt and disappointment. I just don't see why you won't even ask. Maybe he would be willing to help, and then this wouldn't be such a big issue. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my emotions. Because I know he'll say yes, and I don't want to put that on him. He's already doing so much and we need to focus on our family. I'm sorry. The rest of the ride was silent, the weight of our unresolved conflict hanging heavily in the air. When we arrived at work, she got out of the car without a word, leaving me feeling more conflicted than ever. The height of the conflict had been reached, and I was left grappling with the emotional aftermath. The guilt and frustration were almost unbearable, but I knew I had to stand firm for the sake of my family. The day after our big argument, I was nervous about seeing my friend. I didn't want another fight, but I knew I had to stick to my decision. I had to put my health and my baby first, and not let guilt change my mind. When I picked her up, she got in the car without saying much. It was quiet, but I could tell she wanted to talk. After a bit, she said, "I've thought about what you said. I don't like it, but I get why you're doing it." I was relieved but still careful. I told her, "I want to help you, but right now, I need to take care of myself and my family." She looked out the window and said, "I understand. I'm just really worried about what I'm going to do. But I don't want this to ruin our friendship. It's just a tough time." Her words made me feel better. I could see she was trying to understand my situation. I told her I was scared too, and that I wanted to keep our friendship strong while we figured this out. On the rest of the drive, we talked about other ways she could get to work. She mentioned a co-worker who might be able to help, even though they lived a bit out of the way. It wasn't the best solution, but it was a start. Things were still tense between us, but it was getting better. She was upset and worried, but she was starting to understand. I hoped we would both get used to the changes in our friendship over time. Looking back, I saw how important it was to set boundaries, even with close friends. I used to always put others first, but this experience taught me to take care of myself and my family. My partner and I got closer during this time. He was really supportive, respected my decision to shield him from additional stress, and it made me love and appreciate him even more. When my maternity leave started, I felt a mix of relief and worry. It was a hard change, but it also meant the start of something new. I focused on getting ready for our baby, knowing I had made the right choice. My friend and I continued to communicate, but not as much. Our friendship had changed, but it wasn't over. I hoped we could rebuild it with time, understanding each other's needs better. In the end, sticking to my decision was hard but necessary. It showed me the importance of balancing caring for others with caring for myself. As I moved forward, I took these lessons with me, ready to face the challenges of being a mom and having healthier relationships. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you. My best friend had a much more fulfilling life than I do. I had always been very jealous of hers. I want all what she had to be mine, even her husband.
I'm Linda, 23 years old, and I live in a tiny town in Gloucestershire with my 24-year-old good friend Amy. We talked about everything, from our early years to our aspirations for the future, but Amy had it all. She was a stunning, accomplished woman leading a full life that included a home. Luxurious living and a devoted spouse gave me the impression that our destinies were taking very different turns. I led a life of misery and mediocrity, with my uninteresting appearance and employment. When I look at Amy's life, I can't help but feel jealous. Every time I see her with a new car, new clothes, or luxury vacations, I start to feel unfair and self-pity. However, since my friend has so many things, I think it's natural for Amy to pay for every meal, give me things I like, or share a few things with me so I don't feel sorry for myself. Despite Amy's wealth and success, she always strives to be fair, which hints at her underlying kindness. This aspect of her character, alongside her luxurious lifestyle, only makes me envy her more, though I can't help but respect her for it. The mix of Amy's advantages, her generosity, her fairness, and my envy, creates a complicated picture of our relationship. Her life reflects what I want, but also what I lack. Yet her actions somehow create a connection between us, even amidst the jealousy and admiration I feel towards her. Sadly though, my envy and sense of competition stemmed from constant admiration, which made me want to take everything from Amy. As a result, I began to pay close attention to everything she did, hoping to find some mistake that would justify my unhappiness. Then, I would have a reason to make her husband mine. In the middle of the glittering gala, when each glistening chandelier appeared to vie with Amy's amazing universe, a small, annoying thing happened. I saved money and partied with a lot of joy to get my favorite outfit, a jade green dress that I had always wanted. Every time I put the dress on, I felt more secure because of its deep green hue, which complemented my quiet, collected, yet self-assured demeanor. Amy, caught unaware amidst her gleeful laughing, carelessly spilled her scarlet Pinot Noir, staining my cherished dress. Amy offered to buy me a new one in her favorite shade of smoky purple in exchange for replacing mine. She remarked it fit me better, and gave me a more refined appearance. Her gesture was lovely, but I wasn't fond of the new tint. Instead of purple, I had intended turquoise. True to her promise, she showed up with a swanky, smoky purple dress, her eyes gleaming with generosity. For her, it was but a small price to pay, another couture added to the heap of frivolities. But that dress to me was a symbol of the lot that I didn't have, and everything that Amy did. She rewarded my acceptance with a radiant grin, pacifying her conscience at the quick resolution. The fact that I had to alter my attire due to her error irritated me. Amy could never know how much that blue outfit and her kind smile meant to me, because she lives in such a luxurious world. Amy has the opinion that if something is broken or lost, it just needs to be replaced. Given this perspective, I wonder if she will similarly show her resilience and move on to someone else if her fiancé is no longer with her. Coincidentally, I had the opportunity to observe Amy's reaction when she suddenly discovered her husband was having an affair. Amy suffered from pain and sadness. She was lost and didn't know what to do. When Amy's husband cheated on her, it proved how wrong she was to think everything can be replaced like broken things. I really don't agree with how she sees things, so I thought about making her husband cheat again to teach her a lesson. I wanted her to realize that people and feelings are not things she can just swap out. I knew it's not just about hurting her. It's about showing her that some things are special, and she can't replace them easily. Acting on impulse, I changed to the muse style because I wanted to show myself as a simple person, not smarter than the man. I think I am myself, not fake, and this is better than the way Amy lives lavishly and shows off to her husband. Gradually, my comforting words began to bring brightness to many things in his life. I'm sure Amy doesn't do those subtle things because she's only focused on the outer shell of the relationship. Specifically, I began observing the subtleties of his life, assessing his desires, and meeting his needs. With complex delicacy, I immersed myself in his world, my words becoming a balm for his painful existence, my gestures a tacit promise of understanding. Soon, half a year had trickled away, painting our bond with colors deeper than mere friendship. Every fleeting glance held a story. Every word uttered dripped with an indiscernible trust that was uniquely ours. He had started weaving his existence around me, and I, reciprocating his sentiments, found myself relishing this unexpected turn of events. I was amazed at how well my plan was working as the days went by. Deep within myself, a torrent of emotions unfurled. The adoration I was receiving acted as an intoxicating potion, driving me further towards my unspoken desire. In the labyrinth of fleeting moments and lingering emotions, I allowed myself to bask in his admiration, the appeal of being desired blooming in my heart like a beautiful, dangerous blossom. And it was Amy's unspoken negligence, her absorption in her grandeur that subtly coaxed me into acting on my deepest thoughts. My envy and Amy's negligence morphed into a venomous cocktail, prompting me to encroach on her territory, one stolen glance at a time. He began moving in my direction, picking up on the compassion signals I was sending out. In her world of opulence, I stood far less fortunate. My life was simple and devoid of the riches that embroidered hers. Yet the universe conspires to give me with the one aspect Amy had been deprived of: her husband's companionship. Amy found out everything. I wasn't as fortunate as Amy, but even so, I didn't care at the time because Amy's spouse had already been given to me. Despite the upheaval, I felt a calm descend upon me. His affinity towards me seemed unwavering, unperturbed by the disclosure. His warmth hadn't diminished, his trust still intact, and in those moments, I recognized the victory over my circumstances. I might not have been as fortunate as Amy in terms of material wealth, yet in possession of this newfound relationship, I felt rich in ways that Amy's opulence couldn't match. His affection had painted my life with colors richer than any luxury could add. and that was a victory I was ready to embrace. When she discovered the truth, Amy felt like she was hit in the heart by an unexpected arrow. Surprise and pain must be building inside her, like a storm sweeping across the mental landscape she has meticulously constructed. This was a complicated, confusing feeling that she couldn't at all manage. Amy's eyes went from being warm and loving to being icy and aloof. Amy was shocked to see how quickly I had gone from being her best friend to betraying her. Amy undoubtedly has a deep emotional scar on her soul from this ordeal that may never fully heal. Amy might have some concerns, some misgivings in her heart over my relationship with her husband. However, Amy decided to ignore those doubts because she has complete faith in this close buddy. I was so sure about that. Amy was always convinced that our relationship was so strong that nothing, not even her husband, could damage it. Because in her opinion, I'm probably more than simply close friends, but more like family. That's why things lasted so long. So that helped me to know how compatible her husband and I were. Day after day, I realized that Amy's husband continued to play double games with my coworker, exactly the same way he did with my best friend. Amy, what a traitor to his wife and my fragile feelings. The pain was intense because my love for him was genuine and profound. Not just a fleeting attraction. I was haunted by the thought of him gradually leaving me, not understanding why I loved him so much. During that time, every day I wanted to close my eyes and go to sleep, because only by doing so could I escape the painful mood, and at least meet him, even if it was only in my dreams. I missed her surprised laugh, her soft hand on my arm, and how much I wanted to be with her again right then and then. In an attempt to save this friendship, I decided to express my chaotic emotions, thinking that our shared past and intertwined memories would make her see through her impulse my temporary stupidity. And maybe we might return to the times when we got by in life together. As I started to approach Amy with the apology I should have said earlier, and my heart heavy with guilt, an unwelcome surprise was waiting for me. Who can predict what is about to happen? Amy, in a calculated but unforeseen move, bought the apartment complex I called home. A feeling of shock and overwhelm went through me when I learned about Amy's plan. Her offer was simple. She wanted me out of town as soon as possible, in exchange for a small envelope of cash as payment for my lease. When I heard it, it felt like the ground beneath me had disappeared. I was left teetering on the edge of reality, grappling with Amy's cold, calculating judgment, which had literally driven me away from my home. Amy's cold determination was in stark contrast to the warm, friendly personality I knew. But here we were, crossing paths at another painful time of life, a place far removed from the pleasant confusion of our shared past. Life has changed, and so has Amy. Or maybe she's revealing a side of herself I never knew before. I had a really difficult time coming to terms with Amy's actual intentions. Amy's cruel side caused me to feel a strange mixture of feelings that I had never experienced before, which was a stark contrast to her innately kind disposition. Accepting Amy's new negative personality was like walking through a maze of confusion and hurt. The contrast between her past kindness and her current coldness left me feeling confused and emotionally exhausted. It was difficult to reconcile the person I thought I knew with the person standing in front of me at that moment. I had to accept that Amy's actions defined me, and worse, would determine my future, despite the agony inside of me. Has she always had these hidden agendas, or has her situation made her personality completely different? With no obvious answers in sight, questions raced through my head like leaves in a storm. Following the tumultuous events surrounding my betrayal and the unraveling of our friendship, life took divergent paths for both Amy and myself. Amy, resilient and resourceful, seemed to effortlessly navigate through the aftermath of our fallout. With her charisma and determination, she quickly rebounded from the ordeal, finding success and fulfillment in various aspects of her life. Amy's career flourished as she climbed the corporate ladder with unwavering ambition and drive. Her natural aptitude for leadership and strategic thinking propelled her to the top of her field, earning her accolades and recognition from peers and superiors alike. In addition to professional success, Amy cultivated a vibrant social life, surrounded by a circle of supportive friends who admired her warmth and generosity. Meanwhile, I found myself grappling with the repercussions of my betrayal of Amy, struggling to regain my stable life in the wake of broken dreams. The pain of being alone lingered like a dark cloud, casting a shadow over every aspect of my life. Despite my best efforts to move forward, I felt stuck in a cycle of self-doubt and despair, unable to escape the grip of past traumas. While Amy's life seemed to sparkle with accomplishment and happiness, mine paled in comparison. I watched from the sidelines as she celebrated milestones and confidently moved forward, while I remained mired in feelings of inadequacy and failure. The stark contrast between our respective paths was a constant reminder of my failure and deviations in perspective and character. In today's modern society, Amy was the epitome of success and grace, while I struggled to reconcile the person I had become with the person I once aspired to be. Despite my outward facade of strength, deep down, I harbored a profound sense of shame and unworthiness, haunted by the belief that I was undeserving of happiness or redemption. As time marched on, the gap between Amy's life and mine widened, leaving me feeling increasingly isolated and alone. While she continued to thrive and flourish, I remained trapped in a cycle of self-destructive patterns, unable to break free from the chains of my own making. In the end, the divergent trajectories of me and Amy's lives served as a poignant reminder of the power of choice and the enduring consequences of my actions. Looking back, I realized that Amy has been much more successful in life compared to me. She managed to bounce back from tough times and achieve a lot. I've learned that true happiness isn't about having lots of things. It's about accepting your situation, staying positive, valuing good relationships, and nurturing them. Even though Amy may have more money and success, if I had focused on striving for a better life and being content with what I have, maybe Amy and I wouldn't be so distant now. Amy once offered to support and help me achieve my dreams, but I saw it as pity, and it hurt my pride. My wrong perspectives and actions have hurt Amy deeply. I wonder if there's still a chance to rebuild our relationship in the future.
Am I the A? I had a one-night stand and she was 8 weeks pregnant. Accidentally, she was my wife's customer. As I reflect on the events that led up to that fateful evening, it's hard not to feel a twinge of what can only be described as predestined irony. My life at that time, though outwardly stable and content, was a carousel of routine and predictability. I was a project manager at a mid-sized ad agency, a job that provided me with a comfortable living but seldom sparked the passion I once had for my career. Each project blended into the next, each deadline just another date on the calendar. Married for 7 years, Ellie and I had settled into the kind of companionship that was comfortable but, if I'm being honest, increasingly devoid of spark. She was a boutique owner, a career she fell into through a blend of passion for fashion and serendipity. Her store, Ellie's Threads, nestled in the heart of downtown, had become a sanctuary not just for fashion enthusiasts, but for anyone seeking a personal touch both in service and style. Ellie had a knack for making every customer feel like the only person in the room, which explained why her clientele kept growing mostly by word of mouth. Ellie loved her work, and I admired her for it. Her face would light up with every story she shared about her customers. There was genuine excitement in her voice that I hadn't heard in mine for a long time when talking about my own day-to-day life. Perhaps it was this growing disparity in our professional satisfactions that first wedged a sliver of disconnect between us. She was flourishing, vibrant, and I felt like I was just there, going through the motions, watching the days tick by. It was a Thursday evening when it happened. Ellie was hosting a late-night sale event, something she had been planning for weeks. The excitement had bubbled over at breakfast that morning, her eyes sparkling as she laid out her plans for the displays and special discounts. I remember nodding, inserting the occasional "sounds great, honey," into the flow of her enthusiastic chatter, all the while sipping my coffee and feeling an inexplicable hollowness inside. Work that day was more of the same, drowning in emails and phone calls. As the clock neared 6, a coworker, Dan, popped his head into my office. "Grab a drink?" he suggested with a shrug. The idea was not just appealing, it felt like a lifeline. Ellie wouldn't be home until late, and the thought of another evening alone with my thoughts wasn't particularly enticing. The bar was typical for our city, dim lighting, a hum of conversations blending into a sort of soothing white noise, the occasional clink of glasses. We found a spot at the bar, and I texted Ellie that I'd be out for drinks and not to wait up. She replied with a heart emoji and a quick, "Good luck with Dan's stories," which managed to pull a brief smile from me. Dan was in the middle of a particularly animated tale about a client when she walked in. Alone, she took a seat a few stools down from us. Something about her was immediately captivating, not just her appearance, but the air of confidence she exuded. She ordered a drink and caught me looking her way. I turned back to Dan, chiding myself for the wandering eye, but curiosity got the better of me. As the evening wore on and Dan's stories became more about his ex-wife than our clients, my attention drifted. I found myself ordering another drink, alone this time, as Dan had left with a shake of his hand and a pat on the back. Now with space beside me, she moved over, commenting lightly on the quality of the cocktails here as opposed to some other place she knew downtown. We started talking, and it was surprisingly easy. She was visiting from out of town, here on a short business trip. There was an ease to our conversation that I hadn't felt in a long time, a mutual understanding that seemed to click into place without effort. She laughed at my jokes, and I found myself genuinely intrigued by her stories of places she'd visited and the people she'd met. The bar's ambient music faded into a subtle backdrop as our conversation deepened. Her name was Mara. She had an air of someone who had navigated many cities, yet she carried no airs about her travels. Instead, she shared her experiences with a kind of earnestness that was both refreshing and disarming. Each story she told was punctuated by her laughter, a sound that seemed to resonate just at the right frequency to shake me from my usual reserve. As we talked, the initial casualness of our exchange slowly peeled away to reveal a more profound connection. We discussed everything from favorite books and films to our personal philosophies on life and the inevitable question of what happiness truly meant to each of us. Mara had a way of speaking that made you want to listen, her words thoughtful, her demeanor calm yet full of a passionate energy. It was this energy that drew me in, deeper and deeper, into a dialogue that felt as if it was set apart from the rest of the world. The bar began to thin out, the night getting late, but neither of us made any motion to leave. My phone buzzed intermittently, a reminder of the life I had momentarily stepped away from, but each notification seemed less and less important as the night drew on. I told myself that this was just a conversation, just two people talking, nothing more. But deep down, I knew it was edging into something else, something I hadn't planned but perhaps subconsciously desired. Mara's presence filled the space around us with an intoxicating blend of curiosity and mystery. As she shared a particularly touching story about a sunrise she witnessed in Machu Picchu, I realized I was leaning in, captivated not just by her words but by her essence. It was a moment of vulnerability, one that didn't go unnoticed. She paused, a soft smile playing on her lips, her eyes locking with mine in a silent acknowledgement of the shift between us. "It's getting late," she finally said, her voice a soft contrast to the fading music. "I should probably head back to my hotel." The statement hung between us, a polite end to an unexpected evening. Yet neither of us moved. The connection, now palpably thick, seemed to hold us there. It was then that I wrestled with my conscience, a silent debate raging within me. I was a married man. I had responsibilities, a partner who trusted me. What was I doing? But then another voice whispered, justifying the pull I felt. Ellie was busy with her life, absorbed in her passions. Was it so wrong for me to find a moment of escapism? Was it so harmful to feel alive, just for one night? Mara stood up, breaking our gaze. "This was really nice," she said, gathering her things. I stood too, driven by an impulse I couldn't quite quell. "Let me walk you to your hotel," I offered, my voice steady despite the inner turmoil. The walk was short, the city's night sounds surrounding us, yet the silence between us spoke volumes. Each step felt like a decision, each breath a silent question of what I was doing. When we reached the lobby of her hotel, the finality of the evening loomed before us, yet neither of us seemed ready to let it end. "Would you like to come up for a coffee?" she asked, her invitation casual but loaded with unspoken implications. The weight of the decision pressed down on me, heavy and undeniable. This was the point of no return. I knew what my answer should be, what it would be any other night. But that night, driven by a loneliness I hadn't admitted to myself and a connection that felt almost fated, I broke. "Sure," I said, a part of me surrendering to the night, to the escape, to Mara. It was nearing midnight when we left the bar. The night was crisp, the streets bathed in the orange glow of street lamps. Somehow the decision of what came next didn't need much discussion. It felt like a mutual unspoken agreement. We ended up at her hotel, a decision that, in the moment, carried a thrill I hadn't felt in years. The elevator ride to her floor was a blur of mixed emotions. Each floor ascended marked a step further away from the life I knew, from the person I was. When we entered her room, the reality of our actions set in fully. This was no longer just conversation and hypotheticals. It was real, tangible. The next several hours were filled with a flurry of desire and introspection, with a twinge of guilt accompanying each moment of connection. My internal conflict was exacerbated by Mara's kindness, compassion, and lack of expectations. Reality started to creep back in as the night gave way to the first hints of morning, bringing remorse and realization to the experience. Looking back, I recognized the recklessness of it all. It was an escape, a brief moment of stupidity driven by resentment and the privacy the evening provided. But the gravity of my deeds hit as daylight drew near, and I made my way from the motel to the solitude of my home. When I got there, Ellie was still asleep, not realizing the storm that was building quietly above us. A storm sparked by a night that was intended to be meaningless, but ended up being anything but ordinary. The weeks following my indiscretion passed with a deceptive calm that belied the turmoil within me. Meanwhile, Ellie seemed more energized than ever by her work. One evening as we settled into a rare quiet moment after dinner, she began talking animatedly about a new customer, Mara, who had quickly become more of a friend than a client. She's just moved here, doesn't really know anyone yet, so I thought maybe we could have her over for dinner, Ellie suggested. Her eyes sparkled with the prospect of playing host to a new friend, and I found myself nodding in agreement, eager to support anything that made her happy. Accordingly, the following Saturday, Ellie busied herself with preparations, her excitement palpable. As for me, I oscillated between helping her and trying to quiet the persistent voice of guilt in my mind. The doorbell rang, snapping me out of my reverie. I opened the door, and time seemed to stop. There stood Mara, the woman from that night, her eyes wide with equal shock. The air thickened with unspoken recognition. Ellie, oblivious to the silent exchange, swept in with a warm welcome. Mara, I'm so glad you could make it. And this is my husband, Mark. The introduction forced a facade of normalcy, and I extended a hand, the contact sending a shiver of panic through me. Dinner unfolded like a play where the actors knew their lines too well. Mara was polite, engaging in conversation, yet our eyes occasionally met, heavy with the secrets we carried. Moreover, during a lull in the conversation, Ellie mentioned, Mara's expecting. Can you believe it? It's been about 8 weeks already. She beamed, her delight in sharing her friend's news evident. My heart plummeted into my stomach. 8 weeks. The timing was damning, the implication clear. Mara caught my gaze, her expression unreadable. The weight of the situation pressed down on me, suffocating. After dinner, I found myself mechanically helping Ellie clean up, my mind racing with the evening's revelations. Mara had excused herself to the bathroom, and Ellie, humming happily, remarked, She's wonderful, isn't she? I think she's going to fit right in here. I murmured in agreement, my voice hollow to my ears. The irony that Mara was integrating into our lives in more ways than one was not lost on me. When Mara returned, Ellie suggested we move to the living room for coffee. There, amidst the casual chatter about neighborhood amenities and local events, I excused myself to fetch something from the kitchen, and Mara followed shortly after. Alone, we faced each other, an awkward silence stretching between us. I didn't know you were, I began, unable to finish the sentence. Mara looked down at her hands, then back up at me. I found out after our night, she said quietly. I'm keeping the baby. It's something I've always wanted, and it feels like the right time. Her voice was steady, her decision clear. I felt as if the room was closing in on me. Does this change? I mean, does Ellie need to know? I stumbled over the words, fear threading through each syllable. Mara shook her head slightly. I don't see why she needs to know about us. This baby. It's mine. And I'm not asking anything of you. She spoke with a finality that left little room for argument, yet the enormity of keeping such a secret from Ellie weighed heavily on me. Returning to the living room, I was quieter than before, lost in thought over the right course of action. Mara soon made her excuses and left, the door closing softly behind her, echoing like a quiet judgment on my actions. That night, as Ellie and I lay in bed, her contented sighs contrasted sharply with the storm of anxiety and guilt raging within me. The secret I carried was now twofold, complicated further by the impending arrival of a child that might be mine. The fear of losing Ellie, the life we built together, and the respect she had for me battled with my conscience, urging me to come clean. Nevertheless, despite my best efforts to justify myself, none of them seemed sufficient to bridge the gap that had appeared in my life overnight. The choice of whether to reveal or keep quiet hovered over me like a pendulum, ready to swing at any time and have disastrous effects. The next day with my couple, as Mara excused herself from the dinner table, claiming a need to freshen up, the silence she left behind was deafening. Ellie chatted about her plans for expanding her boutique, her words floating over me like a distant melody. My mind, however, was trapped in a vice of fear and guilt, fixated on the brief intense exchange I'd had with Mara in the kitchen. Returning to the living room, Ellie was animated, discussing community events and possible collaborations with local artisans. Mara rejoined us, her demeanor calm, betraying none of the storm that had just unfolded between us. She listened intently, nodding and smiling at appropriate intervals, but her eyes occasionally flicked my way, a silent reminder of the conversation that was far from over. After dessert, Ellie suggested we enjoy some coffee on the back porch. The night was clear, the stars a tapestry of light against the dark sky. The casual setting did little to ease the tension I felt. Mara excused herself early, citing a long day ahead. Ellie, understanding as always, walked her to the door with promises to catch up soon. Left alone, the weight of the evening pressed uncomfortably around me. The house was quiet after Ellie returned, the soft clink of her placing the coffee cups in the sink echoing through the stillness. She sensed my unease. Is everything okay? You've been quiet tonight? She inquired, her voice laced with concern. I think we need to talk. I started. My voice barely above a whisper. The words felt heavy. Each one a step towards an abyss I was terrified to confront. Ellie turned, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her expression shifting to one of apprehension. What's wrong? I led her to the living room, gesturing for her to sit. My legs felt like lead as I paced in front of her, each step a Herculean effort. Tonight was hard. Mara, she's not just a customer, Ellie. Ellie's brow furrowed, confusion and worry mingling in her eyes. What do you mean? I stopped pacing, facing her, the truth clawing at the edge of my tongue. A few weeks ago, I met someone at a bar. It was just once, but it was a mistake. A big mistake, I confessed, my voice cracking under the strain of my confession. Ellie's face was drained of color. And Mara is? I nodded, the admission feeling like a physical blow. Yes, she's the woman from that night. And she's pregnant, Ellie. 8 weeks. The room spun as I watched the impact of my words hit her. Ellie stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the wood floor. How could you? Her voice was a whisper, but it bore the weight of a scream. I'm so sorry, Ellie. It was a moment of weakness, a terrible mistake. Mara said the baby is hers and she doesn't want anything from me. She wasn't supposed to be anyone we knew. Ellie wrapped her arms around herself, as if holding together the pieces of her shattered security. And you thought you'd just keep this from me? Live a lie? I shook my head, desperate to explain, to make her see the remorse that was eating me alive. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought it would destroy everything. I thought... You thought what? That it's okay to betray me? That I wouldn't find out? Her voice rose, each word edged with hurt and disbelief. I don't know, Ellie. I was scared. I still am. I don't want to lose you. My own voice was ragged, strained with the fear of the very real possibility of losing her. Ellie sank back into the chair, her eyes staring blankly ahead, not really seeing the room or me. I need some time to think about this, to understand how I feel. I need you to give me some space right now. Of course, I replied, my heart sinking as the distance between us expanded with her words. Take all the time you need. I'm here when you're ready to talk. She didn't respond, and I retreated to our bedroom, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Lying in our bed, I stared at the ceiling, wrestling with the enormity of what I'd done. The silence of the house was oppressive. Each creak and whisper of wind a reminder of the fragility of the life I'd built with Ellie. Confessing had lifted a weight, but it had also set in motion a series of events that I could no longer control. Ellie's trust in me was shattered, and whether it could be rebuilt remained a question mark hanging over us, dense and foreboding. The guilt of my betrayal, now fully disclosed, was a specter that would haunt the corners of our home, perhaps indefinitely. As I lay there, the hours stretching into a sleepless expanse, I realized that coming clean was only the first step. The journey to possibly mending our relationship, if Ellie could ever forgive me, was likely to be long and fraught with challenges. However, I had no choice but to follow this road since I still loved her, and I hoped that one day she would feel the same way about me. The longest night of my life was the one I spent admitting to Ellie. With each silent minute that went by, I felt the distance between us grow as I laid in our bed next to her. She had her back to me, and although we were only a few inches apart, she appeared very far away. My heart raced with a mix of relief at being able to share my secret and fear for the days that lay ahead. The silence in the room contrasted sharply with the disarray in my head. Morning brought no solace. Ellie was up before dawn, her movements around the bedroom deliberate and quiet, avoiding any unnecessary interaction. At breakfast, the air was thick with things unsaid. She poured coffee with a mechanical precision, her eyes fixed on the task, not once meeting mine. The clink of the spoon against the cup echoed like a siren in the tense silence. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady but cold. I've been thinking all night. I don't know if I can get past this, Mark. But I need something from you if I'm even going to consider it. Her words hung heavy between us. What do you need? I asked, my voice hoarse, bracing for her conditions. I want you to talk to Mara. I want the pregnancy to be dealt with. It's the only way I might forgive this. The only way we might have a chance. Her eyes met mine then, filled with a tumultuous mix of pain and determination because she wanted Mara to have an abortion. The condition hit me harder than I anticipated. The idea of influencing Mara's decision about her pregnancy was a line I had never imagined crossing. Yet the alternative was losing Ellie, the thought of which was unbearable. I'll talk to her, I murmured, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Ellie nodded, her expression unreadable, and left for work without another word. The day stretched out interminably. I was haunted by Ellie's condition, my thoughts, a tangle of ethical dilemmas and personal desires. By the time I called Mara, my voice was barely more than a whisper, laden with the weight of the situation. Mara's reaction was as expected, shocked and hurt. "I can't believe you'd even suggest this, after assuring me it was my choice," she said, her voice tight with emotion. The conversation was brief, and she hung up with a definitive, "I'm keeping the baby, Mark. You don't get to have a say in this." The finality of her decision left me reeling. I had to return to Ellie with nothing to offer but the truth. That evening, as we sat across from each other in our living room, the distance between us felt insurmountable. "I spoke to Mara," I started, the heaviness of my failure bearing down on me. "She's made her decision. She's keeping the baby." I couldn't persuade her otherwise. Ellie's reaction was a complex tapestry of anger, sadness, and resignation. "So, that's it then," she said quietly, her voice quivering slightly. "You've really done it, haven't you? Ruined everything we had for a moment of, what? Excitement? Escape?" I had no answers that could soothe the wounds, no words that could mend the broken trust. "I'm so sorry, Ellie. I never wanted any of this. I was selfish, and I've hurt you beyond what I can ever repair. But I love you, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this right, if you'll let me." Ellie shook her head, a tear escaping down her cheek. "I need time, Mark. I need space to think about what I want, about what's best for me. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way. I don't know if I want to." The following weeks were a blur of tension and tentative interactions. Ellie moved into the guest room, and our conversations were brief, limited to necessities. I respected her need for space, all the while grappling with my remorse and the fallout of my actions. I researched therapists, arranged counseling sessions for myself, and left notes for Ellie, each one an apology, a plea for a chance to rebuild. Slowly we started attending couples therapy. Each session was emotionally charged, a painful unpacking of years of neglected issues and recent betrayals. Ellie's pain was palpable, and each word she spoke about her hurt was a dagger to my heart. I went through a whirlwind of emotions throughout this period. I was scared of losing Ellie all the time and was overcome with remorse. I continued to attempt to make things right even though it seemed like a lot would never be enough since I still loved her. I clung to the belief that we could mend our relationship and get back together if we were open, honest, and patient. I was prepared for the difficult road ahead, no matter how long it took, to mend Ellie's relationship. After I told Ellie the truth, we were both confused and upset about what came next. To help us, we started having regular meetings with a counselor. It made us see things more clearly, but it was also really hard. Every week we started to see how we hadn't been talking to each other properly, and there were things we were both angry about but never said. The lady counselor was kind but also straightforward. She helped us talk about tough topics, like whether we should push Mara to make a certain choice about her pregnancy. Ellie was torn emotionally and morally, and she wasn't sure what to think. She asked her friends, her family, and even people on the internet for advice. The advice she got was all different and seemed to confuse her more. I could tell just by looking at her that it was tough on her. After much thinking, Ellie decided not to interfere with Mara's decisions. Meanwhile, Ellie's work life needed her attention too. Mara was not just a client now, but she frequently visited Ellie's boutique. I saw how Ellie handled this professionally, despite the personal feelings she had. She kept her feelings separate from her work and treated Mara kindly. This was a clear sign of Ellie's strength and good character. I felt a mix of sadness and pride watching her. Ellie suggested a temporary break about 6 months after I was honest with her. The decision broke our hearts, but Ellie thought it was the best thing to do. I moved to an apartment a few blocks away and we had some rules for how we would communicate. These included regular check-ins, therapy sessions, as well as time to be alone and heal. During this separation, I faced the consequences of my actions. I had hurt Ellie, disrupted Mara's life, and affected all of our futures. I spent my alone time reading about trust, speaking with the counselor by myself, and writing in a journal. It made me really confront who I needed to become. As the separation neared its 1-year mark, one rainy afternoon, as we met for coffee in a quiet cafe, Ellie broached the subject I had been dreading. The sound of the rain tapping against the window provided a somber backdrop to our conversation. "Mark, I've been doing a lot of thinking," she began, her voice steady but with an undeniable gravity. "This year apart has given me a lot of clarity, and as much as it pains me to say this, I don't think I can move past what happened. I don't feel the same about us anymore." Her words hung in the air, heavy with finality. The future I had been tentatively hopeful for crumbled in an instant. "I think it's best if we start thinking about divorce," she continued. "I need to start a new chapter for myself. One where I don't have to constantly fight shadows of the past." The shock of her decision hit me with overwhelming force. Despite our efforts and the faint hope that we might reconcile fully, the reality was starkly different. Ellie's expression was one of resolve, tinged with sadness. She had wrestled with this decision, and her conclusion was not made lightly. The shock of her decision hit me with overwhelming force. Despite our efforts and the faint hope that we might reconcile fully, the reality was starkly different. Ellie's expression was one of resolve, tinged with sadness. She had wrestled with this decision, and her conclusion was not made lightly. I understand, I managed to say, though my voice was thick with emotion. I hate that it's come to this, but I respect your decision. You deserve happiness, Ellie, even if it's not with me. Moving forward was tough but important. We had deep talks about how to split up fairly and by the law, taking into account the property we owned together and the life we had built. Ellie clearly wanted to make the process as easy as possible, showing that in spite of everything, we still respected each other. Returning home after our conversation felt different. The apartment was no longer just a temporary space but a symbol of the finality of our split. I found myself reflecting deeply on the consequences of my actions. The pain I had caused Ellie, the disruption to Mara's life, and the end of what had once been a promising marriage were all results of my poor choices. We made a point to continue therapy even if not as often, and Ellie went back to focusing on her boutique. Ellie and Mara were not close again, but they still had a professional relationship until Mara moved for work. During the ensuing months, as we navigated the divorce proceedings, I continued my personal therapy sessions. These became crucial for me to understand my actions better and to learn from them. I explored topics of trust, commitment, and personal growth extensively, committed to never repeating the same mistakes. The process of our divorce came to an end quietly, and without any disagreements. Ellie and I said goodbye with deep sadness, but we also respected each other. We both changed because of what happened. Ellie was more dedicated to forge her own way in life now, while I was left to make sense of the past and rebuild my future, now knowing more about myself and the importance of being honest and faithful. Though those were difficult lessons, I was in need of them. I discovered that true love requires more than just liking someone. It also requires honesty, respect, and a level of dedication that I was unable to provide when it meant most. Even though our divorce was finalized when the papers were signed, that moment will always serve as a reminder of the costs of treachery, and the arduous process of putting things right later. As I look back, I realize I learned a lot. I figured out how fragile trust is, and how hard it is to rebuild once it's broken. Faithfulness and truthfulness are not just words, they are about what you actually do constantly. Now more than ever, I understand how much a relationship needs open and direct communication. Going through this tough time has changed me. I'm not the same person who made the mistake and risked everything important. Instead, I've become a more conscious, more cautious, and more resolute person because of this experience. Even though Ellie and I went through a terrible situation, and we can't predict what's going to happen in the future, we promise to face it together, showing our love, strength, and the silent promise to honor the vows that we once took lightly. Years have passed since Ellie and I finalized our divorce, and life has marched on in ways I never anticipated. Ellie has thrived in her independence. Her boutique, Ellie's Threads, has expanded into an online platform, blending her keen fashion sense with an intuitive grasp of digital marketing. She's become a well-respected figure in the local business community, frequently invited to speak at events and seminars. Last I heard, she remains single, dedicating herself to her career and personal growth. Her success is a testament to her resilience and strength, qualities that I always admired, even more so now from a distance. As for myself, the journey has been one of profound introspection and change. Following our separation, Mara and I tried to co-parent, a decision born from necessity rather than romance. Our son, now a curious and energetic toddler, is a constant reminder of the consequences of my actions. Mara and I are not together. Our relationship is strictly platonic, focused solely on raising our child in a stable and loving environment. This arrangement has taught me more about responsibility and commitment than I ever learned before. Lessons that I deeply value. I've continued to work in the same company but with a new perspective on my career and personal life. The ordeal forced me to reassess not just my personal relationships but also my professional life. I've taken steps to ensure that my work is fulfilling not just on a financial level but also enriches my life and aligns with my values. My days are a blend of work, fatherhood, and continuous learning, with an emphasis on personal integrity and transparency. The impact of my past actions still reverberates through the lives of those I care about. The pain I caused Ellie is something I carry with me every day. It serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of trust and the importance of honesty. With Mara, our relationship has evolved into one of mutual respect and teamwork, as we navigate the challenges and joys of parenting. Reflecting on everything, the greatest lesson has been understanding the ripple effect of one's actions. The choices I made not only altered the course of my life, but also affected the lives of Ellie, Mara, and most importantly, our son. This awareness has reshaped how I approach every decision, every relationship, and how I live my life day to day. As I think about what's ahead, I plan to be someone my son can depend on and admire. I want to teach him important values like being honest, accepting our weaknesses, and being good and fair, through the way I behave. Life continues to teach me new things through its many complications and difficulties. I'm thankful for the lessons I've learned from messing up and the opportunity to correct them little by little each day. The path I'm on is not over yet, but I am dedicated to continue it while being real and mindful. I hope to fix the past and work towards a better future for everyone affected. Edit. As someone who listened to the story and was allowed to upload it on this channel, I also asked for permission to comment on his story at the end. Honestly, he is someone who should be rejected from this life, LOL. It's impossible to cause such a thing and just say a few words to ease his feelings. The way he stood from afar, watching his wife develop and shouldering everything alone, made me feel so sorry. I admire Ellie. If you have the same opinion as me, comment number 1 or yes and no number 0, then add your personal opinion. I am sure that the owner of this article will read and update it regularly. Thank you everyone, for listening until now and always enjoying the stories on my channel. Kiss kiss.